Hello and welcome to a very, very special episode of Advice with Prince. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. My guest today is very special. He has a radio career that spans over 40 years. He's a producer, writer, and also he's my dad. Welcome, Mayes-Sullivan. Hi, Dad.
Hey, Prince, thanks for having me.
Of course. Happy Father's Day. It's
Well,
Father's
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And happy Father's Day to the audience that is watching right now.
Yeah, I'd love to say Happy Father's Day to all of the dads out there, and continued blessings to all of you. And it's nothing like a father relationship with father and child, or father and offspring, because some of them aren't children anymore.
Yeah. So I'm curious. Our producers they got some questions for you.
Great.
I want to know what was like growing up like, and what made you want to go into radio?
Oh, wow. Well, being a native Detroiter, I grew up, when I was born, my parents stayed in an area called the North End of Detroit. So we lived on Russell Street, and always enjoyed listening to recorded music, records and stuff like that, and to the radio. So there were always people that really had an interest to me that had radio careers early on in my life, like Frantic Ernie Durham, Bullfrog. There were other people who were very prominent in the radio community. Later, we moved from over on Russell to Roselawn, which is in the Northwest Detroit area. And that's when I really became keenly aware of, how powerful an impact radio had on its listeners and on communities. So what I would do was I would just listen and try to, duplicate the voice structure of the disc jockeys that I heard, even the news people. I wanted to, try to fine tune my voice in such a way that it would have that radio feel to it. Once I really got involved, I started, bugging my parents about getting me a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And one thing about my parents, I guess with Sharon and I, my sister, they were always indulgent with respect to helping us trying to find ourselves. When I was a real little kid, my dad bought me a guitar because I liked Elvis Presley, and they bought my sister a sewing machine, and I think she did piano lessons or something like that. I'm not really sure. She may have. But anyway, they were the kind of parents that wanted to help and try to push. And, if you had an interest in something, they were at least going to try to allow you to dabble in it. So I remember that about them, and they were very indulgent in that regard. So anyway, getting back to the tape recorder, they bought me this Craig tape recorder. And it was a really nice recorder, Prince. And I had it for a very long time. What I would do was I would have a tape on the reel. Yeah, it was reel to reel. So you'd have to thread your tape through the mechanism onto an empty reel. And I would record radio programs. And when the disc jockey would introduce a record, I would try to edit that out. And I would do the introduction myself. I'd play the record, not all of it, but a portion of it enough for you to understand the intro, and a portion of it enough for you to understand the outro. And when the outro came along, I would edit the live talent out again, and I would put my own voice in. I'd also write copy of commercials, kind of mimicking commercials that were on the air. So of course, our favorite radio stations back in the day here in Detroit were WJLB, which at that time was on AM. It was 1400 on the frequency, and WCHB, which was 1400 on the radio frequency. And I don't want to forget that there was another station which was on FM, which was WGPR, and that was owned by the Free and Accepted Masons, and so that station was around for a very long time. So actually, there were 3 radio stations that were very influential in the Black community during that time. Not only did you hear, rhythm and blues programming, but there were community services. There was also religious programming that you would hear, particularly on Sundays, and sometimes, during the off hours, during the weekday.
Okay. And then, like, in high school, you probably did some work at Mumford.
Yeah. Mumford was one of those interesting type schools because there were so many people there that were so talented and did so many different things. When I was there at Mumford, I came up with like the Clark sisters and, and then Reverend, now Bishop Edgar Van, who was very instrumental in, the choir and the vocal chorales there at Mumford High School. Your sister, she actually became president of the Mumford Choir at one time. And I told her, I said, Shari, you've got some really, really, really big shoes to fill here, coming behind the likes of some of the people that were so powerful in the Mumford Choir and the Mumford music department. I think of Earl Clue. There's a gentleman that just passed away a few months ago. His name was Kerry Campbell, who was a really great saxophonist. I mean, that guy was powerful. So anyway, the reason why I'm kind of discussing the landscape of Mumford is because there were so many different types of talents and, types of people who excelled in various ways: sports, singing, choir. And we had the Mumford radio. I guess it was like just a morning type of announcement situation that you have in most high schools nowadays. Yeah. And so we would, bring you all of the Mumford happenings on the intercom. So another gentleman who was a Mumfordite by the name of Larry Hudson, he was just getting his footing over at WCHB, doing some things over there on the weekend. There were 2 really young guys, John Arnold and of course Larry Hudson. I mean, these guys, they were so talented. They were talented and phenomenal. But Larry, shared with me that we're going to put together a team reporter deal here on the radio station. Now, WJLB already had team reporters, and they would pair up a guy and a girl, and you would do about a 2-minute rundown on things that were happening at your school. So WCHB was like, well, hey, we could do this too. And so Larry kind of tapped my shoulder, and there was another young lady. Her name was Gail McDowell. She was my partner. And so Gail and I would go out to the radio station weekly to do our recording of the events that were taking place in Mumford. So you had all of the different high schools, of course. And throughout the course of the broadcast day, you'd hear what's happening at Northern, what's happening at Pershing, what's happening over at, was Renaissance around then? I don't think so. Yeah, well, all of the high schools, they all had, WCHB reporters. So we loved that, man. It gave us a lot of exposure, and uh, all of that kind of stuff. And that's what ignited my radio fuse with a great intensity.
And also, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you say that you grew up close to like Stevie Wonder and like Stevie and why can't I think of his name? Smokey. Then you
Yeah.
grew up around here.
Well, let me kind of give you a real good idea of what it was like growing up in Detroit in, let's say, the 60s. All right. So now you had the radio stations, which were already kind of entrenched. Then you had Motown, which was really, it was exploding. It had exploded by that time. And the interesting thing about Motown, it was so family. You had all of these artists who congregated in Detroit. They were either born in Detroit or lived in Detroit. And many of them purchased homes in this area of Northwest Detroit, where they lived pretty close to where I lived. So, for instance, Eddie Kendricks of the Temptations lived down the street on Roselawn in the next block where my mom and dad had a home. On the next street over, going east, we lived on Roselawn, and then on Green Lawn, Stevie Wonder lived there. And it was not unusual to be walking home from Bagley School and seeing Stevie on the front porch playing his harmonica. A couple of doors down from Stevie Wonder was a great guitarist by the name of Grant Green. He's gone on now. And he wasn't a Motown artist, but he was a well-respected jazz musician and recording artist who had, a number of different albums that were played on the jazz station here, which at the time was called WCHD, which is sister station to WCHB, and WCHD later became WJZZ. The Four Tops lived in Northwest Detroit. It was not unusual to just be driving down the street or riding your bike or, going to the cleaners over on 6 Mile Road, the Triplet Cleaners. They're on 6 Mile in Pennington. And, I would see Duke Fakir of the Four Tops in there all the time. These people were just, when you'd see them, you say hello or, whatever. And they were just cool people, and they were living in the neighborhood and doing neighborhood stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then, with, Motown, when they started to leave the birthplace over on Grand Boulevard, there was a Motown Records that was on Woodward Avenue. And a lot of recording was going on right there. I imagine that's where like the Jackson 5 and some of the later Motown recording artists, started to filter in. But I think that was rather short-lived before they went out to Los Angeles. But I'm just saying that, just to give you a lay of the land of what Detroit was like back then in the mid 1960s to latter 1960s.
Okay. So then after high school, you went down to Atlanta to go to Clark.
Yeah. Well, we a couple of my friends now, we did a really short stint at Oakland Community College. So we were there for like a semester, just trying to feel ourselves and get our little grade structure together and stuff like that. So we did very well over at Oakland Community. And so one of my friends, Ricardo, he got accepted to Morehouse. And I wanted to go to Northern Michigan, which is up in Marquette.
Yeah.
And so Rick was like, H, man, it's always cold up there. And So, you know, a couple of other people that I knew from Mumford were going to Atlanta. Some were going to Morehouse. Others were going to Morris Brown, Spelman, what have you. And so what happened was I went to a college night and discovered that Clark, which was at that time called Clark College, had been granted an FCC license. And they had a brand new radio station that was beginning to go on the air. And I was like, oh man, I gotta do this. So I wound up applying to Clark. And so I was accepted. So my friends, Ricardo and Rodney, they went down to Morehouse. And there were some other people from Detroit down there prior to us, and then some who, you know, graduated out of our class out of Mumford. There were others who graduated out of various classes in different high schools in Detroit. So there were quite a few Detroiters down in Atlanta, let's say during the mid 1970s. So I went down there in 73. So you're talking about 73 to 77 when I actually graduated. So it was a fun time, man. And they, like I said, WCLK was the radio station that was licensed to Clark College, and it's still WCLK to this very day. So I had an opportunity to work there and, you know, do news, write and produce my own scripts. And then later on, I had an opportunity to do an internship with In Touch Media, which was a church, Dr. Charles Stanley. So I would go over there. I had a car, so that made it easy for me to, you know, kind of move around the city. So I went over to work at the church, and there I began to learn how to edit and record. Once upon a time, you had to learn how to, you had to know how to edit tape, because that was the thing, you know, everything was on tape. So, you know, you would have an edit pencil, and you would line up your speech or what was being said, that spoken word or whatever music you were using, and you could you know, line up the intro where you wanted the edit to begin, and also where you wanted the edit to end. And it was kind of an exacting, almost science, if you will, but you had to be good at it in order to be in radio. Same was true with disc jockeys. You know, when you think about disc jockeys would play their own records. And, you know, nowadays jocks don't do anything but just kind of show up and talk. Well, it's cool. You know, it's the way of the medium. The medium has progressed in such a way. So because everything now is about personality. Back in the day, it was about personality, but you also had to play your own records. You had to know how to slip cue the records. You had to do, you know, live reads. You had to line up your commercials. You had to do the log. You had to make sure that everything on the log was actually executed on air. And you have to sign off on your log when your air shift ended. All of those different things. You don't do that now. It's a new day. So people show up at the radio station, and, you know, a lot of times you interview guests, and I would imagine, I would go so far as to say it's not so much about the music as it is about the mix of media. You hear some music, but at the same time, you're going to have programming that has guests that come on board. The Breakfast Club comes to mind. Ricky Smiley's programming comes to mind. Although he's no longer on the air, Tom Joyner, he was the fly jock. He was the guy that got it on and popping with respect to, I think, Black radio, but having an opportunity to mushroom into a powerful medium. And I think what he did, and the reason why they called him the fly jock was because he did his morning program in Chicago and literally got on the jet plane and went down to Dallas and would do his afternoon program. I don't know how long that lasted, and I can't imagine it having been able to last for too long, because that probably would have been too grueling. But the medium, again, catches up, because technology allows personalities now, as we see with the coronavirus, people can do it in their home. You're at home.
Yeah.
I'm at home. Everybody's has the capability of doing their own thing in their own space. And when I was doing my talk show, I had a talk show over at WCHB. It was short run, but it was a great opportunity to get the voice out there. And also over at the Christian station where I worked, WLQV, guests always came into the station. That was the way that we did things. It was the only way to do it, unless, of course, you had them on via telephone.
Yeah.
But you could tell they were on the telephone. It just had that phone type sound.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, man, you know me. I'll run off. Just tell me, Dad, be quiet for a minute.
No, because he told me how to edit CDs and shit. Like when I was a kid, he would take me to the studio and he would help me. I would help him produce his talk show with his producer Deborah. That's how I learned how to do the intros and like write scripts and make sure commercials were timed out properly and all that. So that
Exactly.
was cool.
Yeah, Deborah was a heck of a producer, and she did a fine job too. Darn, I can't think of the other young lady's name. Oh man.
Someone else?
Yeah, before Deborah, actually. It'll come to me. And then of course my co-host Lester Colley. And Lester was very knowledgeable and had radio aspirations and things of that sort. So he and Lester and I began a program over at WLQV. The frequency for WLQV was 1500 AM. So we call the program the 1500 magazine. And so of course we would talk about news, and I've always kind of geared myself towards news and information. And in that, it kind of spun off into more politic related. So, we were good about inviting guests who were part of the city council or who were, appointees in the mayor's office, not only in Detroit, but in other civic locales around southeastern Michigan. And, then we would also have guests in who were doing things in the community and making an impact, particularly with youth and things of that sort. So that was a lot of fun. I mean, I was actually at WLQV. I was an account executive. So by day I was selling airtime, and then by night I'm producing and getting doing the show prep for the 1500 magazine. Lester was working somewhere, and then he would come over to the station, and at 9 o'clock in the evening, that's when we go on mic live, and Debbie would point the finger at us, and we were on the air. Did that for close to 4 years. Yeah. We did that for close to 4 years.
Yeah, it was cool going to work with you.
It was cool. It was cool having you there in studio, because it's a cool thing. You can't. I don't guess you can take your kid to the plant and where they make cars.
Yeah.
I don't think you can take your kid with you to the mall if you happen to be a salesperson in the mall or whatever. That's not something that you could readily do. But having you be able to come on in and hang out with me at the radio station, it was a big thrill for me as well.
Yeah, it was cool. So after high school, after college, you went to Texas. So
yeah, actually, first before going down to Texas, came back to Detroit.
Oh, okay.
And bumped around again, did a little local radio, but this time I was working for it. I was working over at the Detroit NPR affiliate, WDTR. And I worked there probably for about a year. And that was a great place to work. I mean, you know, I was doing news, stuff like that. Actually, to be honest with you, I wasn't making any money. I was there, but like I was honing my craft. WDTE. What am I saying? WDTR. WDTE. Still the call letters for today. And it's an NPR affiliate, National Public Radio affiliate. So what I was able to do there, which really, you know, really further involved me in trying to understand the national aspect of radio, was I was able to submit some live sound as a news reporter about things that happening here in Detroit. So I got paid for that. Okay. And it's a wonderful thing, you know, when you are listening to the network or to the NPR station, and you hear your report on the air, you know, and you do your sign off, Harold Sullivan, NPR Detroit, and you know you like that when you're young, you know that's what you live for. You want to hear yourself on the air, and you know you want people to know that you're on the air. Well, after that, what happened was I was kind of determining, you know what, in order for me to really do my thing, I may want to just go on and get out of Dodge here. And so there was a lot happening in Houston, like Atlanta when I went to school down there. You know, Houston was on and popping. So I went to Houston, and I didn't initially have a job when I went there. I told my mom and dad I had a job, but I really didn't. And so I went down there, and I was working at a Radio Shack. Yeah, I was working there at the Radio Shack. And, you know, when sometimes, even if you don't even realize it yourself, Prince, you know, you're in line with God's manifest destiny. It just lines up for you, and things begin to happen. So I was staying at the what's it called? The YMCA in the 3rd Ward of Houston. Okay. You know, had my car, most of my stuff, most of my belongings were packed into my car. And so anyway, I would go to work. I would leave the 3rd Ward, and I go out on, I think it was called Bissonnette, to a Radio Shack out there. So I'm working out there, so I was making my little money. You know, my demands on my living situation were totally great, because it didn't cost a lot of money to stay at the YMCA. But so I'm working there, and one day a guy comes in, and we get to talking. He wanted a recording device because he worked for an insurance company. And the more we got to talking, blah blah blah, you know, come to find out he was from Philadelphia, and his name was Danny. And so when I found out he was from Philly, I was like, man, I've been to Philly a number of times, man. I went there for a groove convention one year. He says, groove? I said, yeah. He says, what you know about groove? I said, groove like groove. I went over a groove at Clark College. And so he stuck his hand out, and of course, we did the grip. And he was like, oh man. So, you know, I sold him his device that he wanted and stuff like that. And as fate would have it, he told me, he said, man, look here. You know, I'm never at home at my apartment. He said, if you want to come out of that YMCA, you can come over and stay at my place, you know. So I was like, cool, it sounds like real great, you know. So went over there, and I was staying at his apartment. Like Danny said, he was rarely ever there because he was hanging out with his girlfriend all the time. And then shortly after that meeting, another young lady comes into the Radio Shack, and her name was Lee. And she was a news reporter at KNUZ Radio. What was that? 12:30. Yeah, 12:30 a.m. That was the frequency. The call letters was KNUZ. And when she mentioned that she was a reporter, I said, well, I work in radio too. And it was like the stars just lined up. Everything was connected. And she says, we're looking for an evening announcer. She said, would you like to come over to the radio station next week and do a live audition? And I was like, yes, I would, sure. So she gave me the information. I got over to the radio station and did the live audition. Boom, nailed it. First time around. They offered me a position. I was there at that radio station for close to 5 years.
Wow.
Yep, I was an evening news reporter. So basically what I would do is I would go in, my first newscast was at 6 p.m. So I did the 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. I did those 4. And then what I would do is I would do a set, what we call recorded drops.
Yeah.
Those would air overnight. Now, if something changed during the course of that overnight, the jock would not play that particular drop, because if it was dated, we were saying that, a suspect was still on the loose and the suspect had actually been caught or apprehended or something like that, then we wouldn't want to air that because it makes us look, not like we're on top of our game. But yeah, man, I would do those live reports. And then also too, we had an FM sister station, which was in the same building, called KQUE. And there were times that I would have to do the news for both KNUZ and KQUE. And while at KQUE, the company was called Texas Coast Broadcasters. I had an opportunity to also do some live sound for the ABC network, which I was paid for.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
At KQUE, they were part of a network, and at the time it was called the ABC Directions Network. So, there I really began to hone my reporting skills. It was more than just ripping copy off the AP or UPI line. That's, where the copy or the news reports were actually sent to the radio stations.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that my news director, Debbie Brandt, was a stickler about, write your own copy. And, just to write the copy that comes off of the wire, it's good to have the information, but we need to put our own flavor, our own flair to it. So that's where I really began to really kind of get honed in on the news business more than ever before, because of the fact that you were responsible again for getting this copy produced and getting a 5-minute newscast prepared within a 1-hour window. So, okay, well, the weather changes inside of an hour. Mm-hmm. Updates to programs or news stories that aired earlier in the day change. So you may have to update those situations. If you had sound that you had to bust up, that one of your colleagues who went out and covered a situation, then you'd have to edit the sound into the newscast. So it was a lot to do, but it was fun to do once you got assured that you knew what the heck it was you were doing and how to do it, and to put your newscast together and have your own personal little stamp to it.
Cool. Yeah, it's a whole lot different now. You don't do any of that.
Well,
press
Like,
buttons.
I guess in modern media, particularly on entertainment radio, people don't tune in to entertainment radio to hear news that's earth-shattering, or in any instance, like a lot of local stuff, people, they don't want to hear that. They're just tuning in to hear the music, you know, or tuning in to hear the entertainment information. And that's cool. I mean, it's available. I mean, we have all types of different situations and scenarios, but you know, I was always interested in news and information and what's happening now. You know what I'm saying? To me, that was always very important. And then, you know, down the line. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I overstep your question?
You're good, but we can cut all that. Yeah, but
Okay.
okay. So what prompted you to come back home when you left Texas?
Man, another situation. You know, like I said, you know, your life, your family, your career, the things you love, they all line up in some way or another. You know, there's a saying, God blesses babies and fools. You know, I guess I'm not a baby. So I only there's one other alternative. But the station that I was at, KNUZ, they were in the midst of a shakeup with a format change.
Oh.
For me to have been there for nearly 5 years was a big thing anyway, because like in radio, you rarely are in one place more than a couple of years, you know what I'm saying? So when that came about, I was like, well, I may have to, you know, either get another job here in Houston, see about doing that. But I was getting a little bit antsy about Houston, and I was thinking maybe Los Angeles is going to be where I need to go. So I had, you know, a close alliance of relatives, or as you would say, close family. You know how we are in the African American community. We don't have that blood relationship, but they're like cousins to you. You know what I'm saying? And I thought about maybe going out there and, you know, kind of peddling my wares and, you know, see where I would land. So one day, you know, I'm leaving, left the apartment, everything was all packed in the car. I'm driving in my car, a Mazda 626, and I get to the highway intersection where it's Interstate 20. Yeah. I'm literally sitting there in my car, and I'm saying to myself, if I turn right and I go west, I'm going to LA. However, if I turn left and go east, I'm headed back to Michigan.
Okay.
I literally sat there in the car, Prince, for a good little while trying to make up my mind. Turn left.
What?
Why? Yeah. Well, I'll put it to you like this. If I hadn't, you probably wouldn't be here. So yeah, I was able to come back home, and I had made acquaintance with a fellow down there in Houston who was a program director at the local R&B station, or the urban station as they were calling them then. And he got a job here in Detroit as program director. And what was his name? Jim Snowden. Yeah, Snowman. That's what his moniker was, the Snowman. So I got up here to Detroit, and I hooked up with Snowman, and based upon our, you know, prior relationship down in Houston, I mean, it was just minimal, but it wasn't like we were running buddies or anything like that. but I got a job at a radio station here in Detroit, WDRQ, and doing evening news once again. And I continued to work there. I was probably over there maybe a little bit less than a year. And they too had an ownership shakeup and change. So there I was, out of radio altogether. So I guess I just started doing other work. I began to work at Macy's. Well, that wasn't too bad, particularly during the holiday season, because I like the fervor of, being, in the holiday situations and all of that kind of stuff. Then I eventually, somehow or another, started knocking around and kind of figuring, well, hey, if I can run a board, maybe I can get a job as a board operator at a radio station. So anyway, I went to this one station. I wanted to interview there for an on-air position. And when I went in and I got an opportunity to speak with the owner, he didn't have an on-air position available, but he asked if I would, be interested in doing, being a salesperson, which is not really what I wanted to do, but I took the job anyway and was able to do very well. And not long after that, once again, the stars lining up. They had an overnight position. I was great at the overnights. And I started doing the 1500 magazine. And my coworker there, Jean Williams, she had a music program that she would do. But there were times when, Jean would ask, she said, Harold, can you do the music program for me? And it was like modern gospel music. So it was almost like being in urban radio. And there were guests who would interview people and things like that. So I would do that in Jean's stead when she wasn't there. So I did that for the longest time. I was over at that's when I was over at WLQD.
Yeah.
1500. I was with them 15 years. And so then something came up with relationship to my sales responsibilities. A young lady by the name of Maddie came into the station, wanted to buy some airtime. So as an account executive, I worked with her, and she told me what it was that she was attempting to do. She had a play that she wanted that she was producing and wanted to, put announcements on the air. So we worked out a package for her. And, naturally she said, well, if you want to come over and, see the production, come on over. It's, this weekend, blah, blah, blah. So I told a friend of mine, his name was Kashan, and his fiance, and I was going to take a young lady that I had, just been dating casually. And at the last minute, she wasn't able to go. So I told Kashan, well, I'm not even going to go, man, because I don't want to be a third one. They were like, both of them, come on, come on, go. It'll be fun. So I go and I enjoy the program or the play. And so it ran like Saturday. It ran Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So she calls me up that Monday when I get back to work. And she says, Mr. Harold, I don't have a budget for advertising, going forward, but I wondered if we do this again the following weekend, if you would mind coming over and being our MC. I was like, oh yeah, sure. I'd love to do that. So the following weekend, Prince, since I had seen the play 3 times back to back anyway, before, I'm in the back in backstage talking to some of the actors and stuff. And so just, talking individually, blah, blah, blah. So I'm sitting next to this young lady. Her name was Beta, and she and I were talking. So this other young lady, she comes and sits down with us and joins in our conversation. So Vita's cue comes up, and so she gets up and she kind of turns to me because the other young lady, her back was to her. And she mouthed to me, "She's nice, and she's single too."
That's a great place. Okay, guys, go to click on part 2, and we're gonna learn about how Dad met Mom and my sister, and also what he likes to do. So don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click on part 2 now.
Passion, romance, sex, sin, pain, and death. Love unexpected. When you think you know your partner, think again.